Thank you, Hal. And just to let everybody know, we're going to be recording this meeting. This is a meeting of the Capital Subcommittee of the School Committee. We have actually changed members. The members of the committee are myself, I am the chair. We have Andy Liu, who's on the committee now, a new member. Mariah Nobrega, who's a new member, and Barbara Scotto, who is a continuing member of the Capital Subcommittee. I'm going to start with just a quick piece of business so that maybe Jim Marini will get into this before we begin. And we need to do the minutes. So have people had time to read them? I know Barbara and I have. Andy, did you? Yes, and Mariah? No. Okay. Well, you may not have been at the last meeting.
Well, I also wasn't on the committee, so I wasn't planning on voting.
Okay, fine. So can I get a motion? Barbara moves it and I'll second it. I'll do a roll call. Barbara?
Yes.
Thank you. Andy?
Yes.
Thank you. And Mariah?
Abstain.
And Helen votes yes. Okay, so we finished that piece of business. What I would like is for people, I think there are many people here who don't know each other. So maybe you can just say your name and sort of what your connection is to being here on this panel today. Just to make sure that people know, we have 9 attendees, 10 attendees also that are watching us as we deliberate and talk about the issues. So I'll start. I'm Helen Charlupski. I'm chair of the Capital Subcommittee and have been for a while, and have been involved with many of the building projects throughout the years, over the last 28 years. Barbara?
I'm Barbara Scotto. I have been on the Capital Subcommittee, I think the entire time I've been on school committee. And I am completing my 12th year, so I've been on this for a long time.
Great, thank you. Mary Gardner.
Hi, I'm Mary Gardner. I'm the director of the Lawrence Extended Day Program.
And we'll be talking about, you're you're in the second grouping of the agenda, just so.
Nope, not a problem.
That you're aware. So if
Thank you.
if you're not as interested, but you can continue to stay.
Okay.
Okay. Andy. Andy?
Yes. Hi, I'm Andy Liu. I joined the school committee about 6 weeks ago. And this is my first Capital Subcommittee meeting. We just got our assignments.
Asa?
Hi, I'm Asa Sedelius. I'm the Heath School principal. I've been at Heath School. This will be my 7th year starting this year.
Matt? Matt? Can you hear me? Matt, you're on silent. Do you want to introduce yourself, Matt? No, you're still on mute. Sorry.
Hi, yes, I'm Matthew Gillis. I'm the Director of Operations. I'm sharing an office right now, so occasionally I take my headphones off to talk to somebody else. Multitasking, apologize.
Yeah, Suzanne?
Yeah, hi, I'm Suzanne Fettersville, formerly of the Capital Subcommittee, and I am chair of the school committee this year.
Great. Mary Ellen?
Mary Ellen Norman, Deputy Superintendent for Administration and Finance.
Great. Michelle?
I'm Michelle Gordon. I am the chair of Health and Safety for the Brookline Educators Union, and I teach kindergarten at the Ruffin Ridley School.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Hal?
Hi, Hal Mason, Assistant Head of School at the high school.
Thank you for joining us. Carlos?
Carlos de Souza from Garcia Gillespie de Souza, MEP engineer.
Maybe you can tell people what MEP is.
Oh, mechanical, electrical, plumbing.
Thank you. Mariah?
Mariah Nobrega, new member of school committee, along with Andy, Lawrence alum, BHS alum, and current Pierce and BHS and BEEP parent.
Great, thank you. Michael Sandman?
Mike Sandman, Chair of the Advisory Committee, which is the Town Finance Committee.
Thank you for joining us. Jim?
Hi, Jim Marini, Interim Superintendent this year.
Great, thank you. Charlie, who's hiding there? We can't see you there. Now it's better.
Charlie Simmons, Director of Buildings for the town and schools.
Thank you. Carla? Carla, I can't.
Okay, Carla Benka, Vice Chair of the Advisory Committee and Chair of the Advisory Committee's Capital Subcommittee.
And Sharon?
Hi, I'm Sharon Abramowitz, and I'm on the school committee, and I'm co-chair of the Remote Learning Task Force for the school committee.
Thank you. And Robin Coyne, do you want to introduce yourself?
Certainly. Hi, I'm Robin Coyne. I'm the assistant to the school committee.
Par excellence. Okay, that's my editorial. So we're going to start with the agenda item of looking at our buildings, and we've asked Carlos de Souza to come here, who knows many of our buildings in terms of their ventilation systems. The goal of this is to do basically, and hopefully have enough information for feasibility. Can we get everybody back into the buildings in a safe way? Students, teachers, staff, whoever might be. And this is sort of in coordination somewhat with the Task Force on Public Health that has been talking about all the different items that people have to have in place in order for school to be able to open safely. There was a very good presentation by Joe Allen, a Baker parent and a professor of public health at the Chan School at Harvard, who talked about the issues that one needs to make sure are in place in order to be able to open up school and have it be done safely. I think with that introduction, I think what I'd like to do is maybe just go, and of course right now I don't have my agenda straight up, but I think the first item is the ventilation. And I think that's something that I'd like Matt and Charlie to do maybe to show your slide if you have it up. Matt? No, Matt, we can't hear you. Sorry.
Actually, if Robin could pull up the summary grid of the schools.
So the purpose is to look at all the different aspects that we talked about at that meeting. The type of ventilation, the MERV filters, the ability to turn off recirculated air. You have a whole list that you're going to go through, correct? Matt?
Let me, can folks see
yes.
See my screen now with the
yes.
HVAC inventory?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so after some discussions early on, we wanted
Matt,
to...
do you mind just zooming in on the PDF a little bit, just because it's very small?
You can do it on your own too, you know?
Not in Zoom. If you hit that plus, yeah, down there, that plus, that should help.
How's that?
Much better, thank you.
Nope, no problem. It's my first time sharing my screen. It's also my first pandemic. So the HVAC, we came up with a few questions after we started to gather some information and had some feedback from the expert advisory panel on air quality in the schools, and went over this with Charlie Simmons, and then in discussions with him, we asked him to bring Carlos, an engineer on several of our, that's worked on several of our buildings, to be able to answer questions in greater detail. But in short, you can see when the filters were last changed. You can see if it's a MERV 13 rated filter or higher. And a quick summary of that is that air filters in buildings have a MERV rating for what level of dust, allergens, and other materials the filter can catch. They range from 1 to 17, I believe, and 13 and higher is high enough to capture a high enough rated filter, basically a dense enough filter to catch particles small enough that are incorporated in a virus. And I think most people walking down the street have heard of a HEPA filter for a vacuum, or occasionally in a car, and that would be I think a MERV 16 or 17 rated filter. And then, you know, most of our systems were MERV 8 filters, and you'll see there are a couple others that are not. Beacon's upgrading to a MERV 13 as of yesterday. We rent that from Temple Obahé Shalom. Putterham happens to be a MERV 11, and the new schools are a MERV 14. And with the displaced air systems, whether that's designed at CCS or New Driscoll, or at Tappan by RS Associates. You know, and then the ability to turn off recirculated air, the more fresh air coming in from the outside. I think everybody can reasonably grasp that outside the building, without somebody breathing on it right away, that air is not really carrying a virus or too many germs, instead of recirculating there within the building. And then questions that have always come up about if we open the windows, what does that do to the system? And basically, it makes it work a little bit harder than it should. It won't be as efficient, but we can always bring in fresh air, which, you know, I think from a practical level will be somewhat seasonal. People don't want to be opening the windows when it's 10 degrees out, nor do they really want to open the windows the way it's been the last couple of days when it's 95 and humid. But I think, you know, one's more tolerable than the other. And then we asked Charlie about concerns about building exhaust vents being too close to the fresh air intake. Most of the time, the design of buildings is done well enough where that they're never right near one another. But with the add-ons and changes over the years, this question was asked, and Charlie can expand on it. But this was how he answered the question. So before I turn it over to Charlie and Carlos, in short, I think our system is up to code, relatively clean. And then it's just a matter of, you know, how is this going to handle when we have, whether I'll call it 50% of the students back in the building or 100% of the students back in the building. I guess I'll defer to Charlie or Carlos or back to the chair.
Did you want to add anything, Charlie?
I guess, you know, looking at the chart on air filters, the better thing to do would be to try to get a higher rated air filter as you could, you know, all the way up to a 17. The problem is that the systems need to be designed for that ahead of time. You just can't change from one filter system to another. Now, physically, the filters might fit, but you're going to cause a huge pressure drop, and there's not going to be enough airflow, and the equipment is going to be really taxed. So you can't just switch from one filter to another. So typically, you know, MERV 8s are very common, and that's what we've been using for many, many years. Carlos is actually the engineer for the Ridley CCS, and he spec'd out that MERV 14. So I feel confident right now. The buildings have been running 24/7 that I had at the camps, 100% fresh air all the time, no recirculating air. And we were actually able to get through this hot weather with no complaints. My bigger concern was that the systems wouldn't be able to handle that amount of fresh air coming in that's hot and humid, and we wouldn't be able to temper the air. So it was okay.
So Charlie, if I can add just a couple of things. One is, so this is at the equipment level. One thing that we need to do is, especially at places such as the Ridley School, where we have demand controlled ventilation, even in classrooms. So we actually have VAV boxes that will close based upon the amount of CO2 in the space. So those functions should really be disabled so that we have the maximum ventilation that the system can produce. So that would be another function. That can all be easily done through the building management system. So that really should be done. And then I totally agree with your analysis about changing the filtration out. So what you should do is increase the MERV rating to the highest possible without adding the amount of static pressure that you degrade airflow. Once you degrade airflow, you're also degrading ventilation. So that needs to be looked at. And systems that have 100% outside air, such as Ridley, we can actually keep the mixed air damper just closed because we only use that at night for recirc air. So that should just be in that state. That we should have some sort of on the BMS, we should just put a button that you can click and it'll put the system into this mode. So all those things are reviewed. And then obviously, we also want to be able to flush these buildings out. And ASHRAE came out with just a guideline, which they had as approximately 1 week. And when we do building flush outs, we look at it more than that. We actually look at an amount of cubic volume, and we follow the LEED standard, which is for construction, for building construction. So our recommendation would actually be to follow that LEED standard. And what we've looked at is that new buildings such as Ridley have about 4 air changes per hour. And that typically takes about 2 weeks to have that flushed out. In older buildings where you have recirc air and you don't have as much ventilation air, it may take a month or so to do that. So it may take longer. And then the other thing is that systems that have conventional overhead distribution for VAB, in other words, they supply air at the ceiling level and they return air at the ceiling level, you don't have the same ventilation effectiveness. By ASHRAE, that has about a 0.8 ventilation effectiveness. Where at Ridley, we have 1.2, which is displacement ventilation. I think you're also going to have that at Tappan, is what I just heard. So those have a ventilation rate of effectiveness of 1.2. So it means you don't have to run it as long. But that's something that should be considered when you flush the building out, and then you provide the most ventilation that you can while the building is occupied.
So Carlos, go ahead, Helen.
Yeah, just if you could just explain to those of us who are not that savvy about ventilation systems, what does flushing the building out mean and what do you do to do that?
When you flush out a building, you're flushing it from, typically when we've done it in the past has been for VOCs, such as on the LEED project. So you're removing all those contaminants that are in that airstream. And so that continues 100% outside air for a period of time, which is typically about 14,000 cubic feet. So that's how much total volume you need to do. So to get to that level takes, sometimes takes weeks.
So are we doing that now, Charlie?
Yes, and we have been doing it. Historically, before this happened, we always turn the buildings on about 2 weeks before school starts to air them out. There might be painting or new carpeting, and also make sure all the systems work, make sure that all the hot water works. And going off what Carlos said, ASHRAE did make some recommendations, and Carlos and I just spoke the other day on it. So those buildings that had camps have been on and are on, and those buildings that I presume will open for the students in September. We've already started the programming. We'll be starting those buildings up probably on Monday. 100% fresh air, 100% exhaust. As far as demand ventilation, most modern buildings have that. We don't have that feature in the older buildings, but we can do some changes with the energy management system. We disable the demand ventilation like in a Ridley school, and essentially tell it that we need 100% fresh air, which is it's been happening for a while. So that's all set.
That's great.
So if I could shift just a little bit. So Charlie, your point, and Carlos, you agreed, was that you can't just upgrade the filter to a rating that's going to capture the virus, because it could either stop the airflow or cause the motors to burn out. In either one's bad, because then you're reducing ventilation.
That's correct. The other thing to consider is that you should be changing these filters more often than quarterly. So our recommendation is really start at once per month, and then check the filter, clean the units, clean the coils. Start at that point.
Okay. So another question in regards to that, and with bringing students back in the building. So if we can't in relatively short order upgrade the filters, is there anything else we could do that would help improve the air quality besides opening the windows year round? Like in particular, any thoughts on bipolar ionization to the HVAC systems, which would ionize the virus and sort of cause it to die in X amount of time, so it wouldn't be coming in or being recirculated, so to speak.
I don't know if you want to respond to that, Charlie. I think you've had some recent information.
Yeah, we've looked at ultraviolet light and most recently ionization, and we had a company make a proposal. I shared that with the school department and the health department, and they made some claims that it's easily installed in the existing building systems. There's no maintenance, it's low cost, and that it will kill the virus, I guess, within 30 minutes by spreading ionization particles in the air into space. So we asked for some further information and what it would be involved. I was told that it would take a minimum of 4 to 5 weeks just to get the equipment. I was told that they have been installing this on airlines and they've been trying to install it on more buildings downtown. One of the things you have to be very careful with because of this is there's a lot of products out there that make a lot of claims. And you need to get backup testing data approved by an agency to make sure that it works, because people will sell you just about anything you want.
Matt, just so you know, yeah, I was gonna say you're sharing still.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. That's okay.
The company did provide a test report from 2011. There has been no updated reports. There's nothing that they've shown to the EPA. Dr. Jett looked into it further, and his data showed that there's only an effectiveness of 60% on ionization. So he and Pat Maloney, also the health department, suggested that the company offer to do a test in one of our buildings for free and to prove to us that in fact their claims are accurate. We've reached out to the company. There has been some dialogue, but no committal to do that. So it's something we're going to keep looking at. You don't want to invest a huge amount of money, millions of dollars, and not have to do anything. The money could be used elsewhere. You also got to be careful that the product you get doesn't make the situation worse. One of the things with ionization is you can also put out a byproduct of ozone. Ozone, remember the days with the old photocopiers? You don't want to fix the killing the virus and creating an environment that's not good for the teachers and kids. So there's a potential that ionization could create ozone. So we don't want to go down that road. What I'm looking for, and frankly it doesn't exist, is this magic bullet that no one has. I mean, there's many, many, many different opinions, but this is so new that there isn't that one answer out there right now.
Thanks, Charlie.
So just a question, because somebody will ask it. We have most of our buildings MERV 8. Coolidge Corner School, thank you very much, Carlos. You made it MERV 14. That's wonderful. What would it take to change to a stronger filter? Would we have to change out the whole system? Is there a way to adapt the system to be able to take a better filter? The filter is after the air has gone through the classroom, correct? Or it's before the air gets in? Before.
It cleans the fresh air.
It cleans the fresh air from outside.
I guess to your question, I'm going to defer to Carlos.
Well, it actually, it will clean the fresh air because it's going to be, if it's a mixed air system, it's after the mixed air damper. So it will clean even the recirculated air as well. So there is a benefit to going to a higher MERV rating if you can do it. I think you have to look at it from building by building. Obviously, if it's an air handler, chances are that you probably have a better condition to put in a higher MERV rating than if you do a unit ventilator, which is probably where the MERV 8s are right now.
Yeah.
So same thing with the unit ventilator, the filter goes on the face of it. So it's after the fresh air and it's after the mixed air, so you do have that benefit.
Okay. And do we have any of them that are air handlers, any of our schools that?
Yeah. If you look at Matt had a good, the HVAC summary, I think the MERV 8s that you see there are probably all unit ventilators, just looking at the schools.
Well, Pierce isn't, is it?
Pierce is small air handling units in the rooms, except for the A wing. It's got a very, very large, 3 large air handling units. Pierce is sort of an anomaly of, it's a very strange HVAC system. It works well now, but it's not typical of other buildings that we have.
And could that be upgraded to a MERV 13?
As Carlos mentioned, we have to look into it and measure pressure drop across the coil. And it's on our list of things to do, and the contractor is aware of it. I don't think we could jump up, frankly, to a MERV 17. We might be able to jump up to a MERV 8 or 9. I don't know. It's going to have to be system by system, as Carlos mentioned. What you don't want to do is say, okay, we're going to go up to the HEPA rating and then have to remove entire units and replace ductwork, and that's just not going to happen. It's just too long.
No. What is feasible within the next month?
Yes.
To get done is more the question. If these are air handling units that Carlos is talking about that can be upgraded, is it possible? How much will it cost? And I think that would be really critical to find out.
Sure.
Okay. And I'm trying to think what else. One of the things that was really emphasized by Dr. Allen, who's, the public health person, was saying fresh air from the outside is really the best, opening windows. And I think Matt and Dave Hvac, you've done an incredible job of inventorying our schools. Do we have any kind of document on it, or are you just going to give a report out?
Can people see the screen I shared, or?
Yes, we could, not now.
Not now. So when I changed the screen, you couldn't see it, because right now I'm seeing the window inventory. I'll click it again. There we go.
It's not being shared.
How
yes.
about now?
Yes.
Okay. So here's the window inventory thus far. We'll start with the Baker School and kind of go from the top. So number of full-size classrooms that are in the building is 42. Number of windows, that's in progress. The data I got back didn't always necessarily count all of the windows in all of the rooms. And then we wanted to know how many were operable, how many special rooms there are. This is sort of to help the principals plan if they were going to be splitting classrooms. So specials could be the gym, the library, the cafeteria, especially made art room or music room that's, multi-purpose rooms that are not the size of your typical classroom. Number of windows in those spaces, what's operable. Small group rooms, we do a lot of work in small group rooms for special education, small group pullouts, ELE, a variety of things. And then any interior rooms that had no windows, because those would be rooms we're looking at to see about air, portable air purification systems, things with a HEPA filter to treat that space. So going through, you can see Runkle, Heath, Runkle, Lincoln, you know, pretty good with the windows being operable. Work orders going into Charlie, and then number of special rooms, the number of windows that were operable. And some of the stuff I just haven't been able to record yet because we started doing this stuff last Thursday. And as I'm getting information back, I've been keying it in. For the most part, it seems like we can increase the ventilation significantly in almost all the classrooms. And the high school, which I went through half the third floor and the fourth floor Monday night, was a building that I thought would be in kind of the worst shape, and it was overall in pretty good shape. Still probably going to be in the 90th percentile, and since I've been here working with Charlie, the town facilities department, we've had some significant window repair projects at both the New Lincoln School and at BHS, because we were at points where there were multiple windows not functioning in rooms, and then I think we got it to the point where they were either all functioning or there were at least 2 operable windows. Some rooms have 4, 6, 8 windows. Other rooms might have 2 or 3 windows, and of course the rooms, small rooms that only have 1 window. Everywhere that we've come across, those were functioning. So I think we can increase the ventilation by opening the windows. It's just how much that helps. I guess I would also defer to Carlos, Charlie, and the expert advisory panel on what that does. And I think it's going to vary quite a bit room by room. You know, if you've got, 70% of one wall is windows that are operable, that's obviously quite a bit of ventilation and fresh air you can bring in over and above the system. So I'm not too clear on how much fresh air is enough, other than, more seems to be better and desirable at this point.
So, Matt, the one caution there would be if you have buildings that are air conditioned and you open windows, and you bring in right now hot, humid air into the classroom, that would obviously be a concern because we don't want moisture to form.
Carlos, keep going with the moisture forming, because I want people to understand that. I think I understand it, but so moisture forms in the room. Or on the system, what happens?
Well, if you have moisture, and all of a sudden, when you have a mold spore, then it's possible you end up creating mold in some of these rooms where you condense. So you have to be careful with that. Exactly. Rooms that you don't have air conditioning obviously are not as a concern. The other thing too is when running systems where you don't have air conditioning, you may want to consider, you may want to consider running the system at night to cool down the buildings, because the nights pretty soon are going to start to get a little bit colder, and so you run it at night, and you may want to just reduce it a little bit during the day so that you'll have a better temperature in the building and still maintain that ventilation with these open windows that you're talking about.
Okay. Did somebody have a question? Yeah, Asa, please.
So,
I can't hear you.
I unmuted myself. So can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Great. So I just know the windows at Heath School, right? And so those are just those crack open, just forming like just maybe 5 inches or so, right? So you push them open. So I'm curious, like how we're thinking about district-wide. We might have windows where you kind of throw them up and more air can come in. And so an operating window is great, but I don't know that at Heath in particular, like the kind of windows that we have are going to really help with a lot of airflow. That's kind of my worry about that. We're fully operational, but the space, the gaps, the location might not be what we are hoping it to be.
For what it's worth, I seem to recall Joe Allen saying in his presentation that even being able to crack a window open 2 inches would really substantially change the risk in that room. I mean, obviously the more the better, but even 2 inches he thought was important.
So actually on the Heath School, that has the operable windows, but it also has unit ventilators in there. So you can take fresh air from the unit ventilator and open a window. There is an air conditioning there, so you wouldn't have this condensing problem that we just spoke about. And so natural ventilation is 4% of the window area operable compared to the floor area of the space. So that's how much you would need. So just as the was just stated, just cracking a window open would obviously help tremendously increase the ventilation.
Well, I think that's the kind, I'll close with just saying, I think that's the kind of information that people need to understand, because the teachers think, oh, it just opens a little bit. That's not a whole lot. What are we doing here? But knowing that, research and data and airflow patterns show that it really does make a big difference. I think those kind of messages go a long way. So.
Carlos, could I trouble you to repeat that calculation? Natural ventilation is 4% of the...
It's 4. So you want the window opening to be 4% of the floor area of the space. That's based on natural ventilation. But that would help in the ventilation of the building, even with mechanical ventilation, such as unit ventilators.
Can I ask a question about that? So it's not cubic volume, it's just floor area?
It's the codage is based on floor area. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, ideally, what you actually would want, if you had windows that are low at that are operable at low, and you also have windows that are operable at the high ceiling level, that would be ideal because you would have a convection occur.
We have that in some of our buildings. I can't remember which ones, but I know that the high school has that.
Yeah, I suspect the older buildings, that's how they planned on ventilating the building, was by that method.
Right, and I think the old Lincoln actually has that too, maybe.
Oh, Helen.
Yes, Barbara.
I have a different question. We don't know how long the pandemic is going to be in place. So what happens when it begins to get colder and you can no longer really open the windows because of the temperature? What effect is that going to have?
Well, it seems to me, this is not the engineering talking about it, but rather the mother and me, you put on a jacket and a sweater, and it may not be as comfortable, but at least you're there with your teacher and your classmates, as opposed to sitting at home in front of a screen. But, that we'd have to see as we go along. I mean, we may have cold days, days off, or, instead of a snow day type of thing, where we go to remote. But I think, that would be sort of be my sense. I want to stick with the buildings for a minute. And the one area that has been worrying me is the bathrooms. And I'm wondering, Charlie, if you could speak to it, and Carlos, about what we have in our bathrooms in terms of ventilation. How do we make that work well, or is it working well?
Yeah, I can interject on that. All the bathrooms have mechanical exhaust, and they run whenever the building's occupied. And the idea is to put the space in the negative air pressure, and it draws air in from the hallway or wherever it's connected to, and that keeps odors from going out into the hallway. The air is not recirculated. It's 100% exhausted to the outside. We have maintenance companies come in once a year, called belts and filters and grease barons, and they check the equipment. I also asked...
have they been in already?
They're halfway through. They'll have it done definitely before school starts. I'm not concerned about that.
Mm-hmm.
I did ask Ed Clancy yesterday for a favor, and I mentioned that Mark Sack will be turning on the rest of the buildings, and if the custodians in their travels could just go into some of the bathrooms. Essentially you take a piece of toilet paper and you put it up to the vent and see if it gets drawn in. That way I can verify. The older buildings, I don't have that kind of input. In a newer building like a Ridley, I know when an exhaust fan doesn't work. I get a feedback from the computer, so they're going to work on that for me to verify. But as I think I mentioned yesterday, Helen, if a toilet exhaust fan isn't working, I can almost guarantee you there'll be a complaint very quickly. whether a work order, a call, or an email saying that something's wrong. So, and then we'll get right on it. So.
And if I could just for a minute, Mariah, and then I'll call on you. Matt, when you're doing your window inventory, could we make sure to know if there are windows in the bathrooms too? Because I assume, Carlos, correct me if I'm wrong, that is another help in terms of getting fresh air in and drawing it out. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So if, Matt, if you could make sure.
That's one of the things for me to double back on. I got that back from some folks, not others, but at least that's a quick recovery on that.
Okay, thank you. Mariah?
I don't know if you want to talk about it now, but I also had the question about not just the pressure of the bathrooms, but the aerosolization and the toilet lids that you had brought up previously. And is that going to be addressed as well with having covers for the toilets?
So that's a question I think that we need the health experts to tell us. I did hear something at the meeting that was talked about during one of the task force meetings, but Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong, or Matt, I think all of our toilets do not have covers. Is that correct?
No, they don't. I believe, Carlos, it's against code to have a cover on a public toilet. Am I correct with that?
I would have to check on that, Charlie. I'll talk to Chris Garcia in our office here and see what the issue is with putting a cover on a toilet. I know that we do not specify covers on toilets.
I thought it's either under the plumbing code or a health code
Because, do you know why, Charlie?
Transmission, diseases or like that. Also accessibility.
Yeah, I can get that information and send that to you.
Yeah, and the question I think I would ask of our health task force is more, is the problems of having a toilet cover and the germs that could go along with that worse than having it open?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I don't know about that.
I'm not sure either.
And if it's helpful, the recommendation from Joe Allen and his team was to install lids on all toilet seats.
Right. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to that. That may be something that just because of the way the toilets are made, I'm not even sure they make those sorts of toilets with lids, but we can look into it. Okay, Andy? Yes.
Yeah, I just had a question about the portable units with HEPA filters that Matt mentioned briefly. I think when this came up in an earlier meeting, you had thought that procuring these was going to be really difficult because everybody is trying to get them. I'm just wondering how that has turned out and whether you think we can deploy them on a large scale for spaces that might not be as well ventilated.
We're still in the process of sort of fact finding and getting a system that's going to be reliable, work, do what it says it's going to do, and that we're going to be able to get replacement filters for and those types of parts, as in addition to the counts. But early indication is we're going to be able to get some, if not most of them so far. The companies seem to be able to have at least some on hand. Although when sometimes the skeptic in me comes out, because when somebody wants to sell you something, the answer to every question is yes. They don't like to say no.
Carlos,
ideally, how many are we talking about for the whole district?
Not there yet, but it might well be over 100 if we're going to do all the interior rooms where kids were going to be getting service, and the nurses' offices. Wouldn't necessarily buy one if there was a singleton office and one person worked there and they didn't really share the space with anyone. We wouldn't necessarily be buying a HEPA filter for that person's office when they're pretty much the only one that's using the space.
Thanks.
And how much do we have a sense of the cost per unit?
Yeah, they seem to range between 150 to $300-400. They definitely vary by brand and type and warranty.
And Carlos, do you have any recommendations on ones that are good?
I can send you some. Some of the manufacturers that we have, there's one called MAFNA, M-A-F-N-A. Heal Air is one that you probably should look at. That's one that we've actually looked at as a portable HEPA filter. I can send you that information, Matt.
No, that'd be great. Thank you, Carlos.
Mariah, did you have your hand up?
I did. I have a question about air exchanges per hour. I have a couple of questions about that. I think that came up in Joe Allen's presentation, and I want to say that I can't remember the exact number, but I want to say he said it was something like at minimum 3 exchanges per hour. And my question is, are we going to get to a point at which we will know exchanges per hour at either the building or the room level?
I can tell you Ridley School is 4 air changes per hour. That's what it's designed to. The other buildings, it would be a matter of calculating the air being provided to the space, and most classrooms and the other buildings are probably unit ventilators. So that would be a calculation that's made. The 3 air changes per hour, I think, is a reasonable amount.
But Carlos, getting to that, that would imply a newer modern building with a centralized air system versus a building built in the 1950s or 60s or 70s.
Yeah, so what we'd probably have to do is look at that and see how it can be supplemented with fresh air, either through operable windows or what have you. But, yep.
Can I just get a clarification on that though? Charlie, are you saying that older systems don't allow you to calculate it, or they wouldn't hit 3?
They wouldn't hit 3 necessarily.
Okay.
You can calculate it. It's just it's a basic thing, but
yeah,
because they were never designed for that in the first place.
So, but at the end, between the baseline ventilation system and this window calculation that you mentioned earlier, Carlos, we could essentially make some sort of a combined calculation that would represent basically air exchanges per hour?
Yep. Yep, we've done that before, and we can see what that would, you may still not get there, but that can be looked at.
And when we talk about air exchanges per hour at the building level, to what extent is that reliable across the building versus having, for example, one space that's highly ventilated and other rooms that are very poorly ventilated?
Well, you need to look at it really space by space so that you don't end up with that condition that you just mentioned. That could happen, but it should be looked at on a space by space basis.
So Matt and Charlie, will we have that? Will you get that for us so we know what that is?
I mean, I can tell you basically how many windows are in a space, but I've never done the air exchange calculation. And I guess to Carlos's point, it would clearly vary. If I got 2 rooms about the same size and one has a couple of windows and another one has 6 or 8, that's going to be different.
Yeah, so you'd be looking at typical rooms. A lot of these are, they're all schools, so a lot of these classrooms are typical.
I would say the same thing too. You're going to have to take an example of a room in a building, typical classroom, typical office, and get the numbers from that.
Well, I think that for a lot of people, though, typical isn't the concern. Worst case is the concern. So I think we want to threshold down as well, not just average.
Well, you want to be careful that you're not doing rooms that we may not be using.
Well, but I think this informs which rooms we may not be using.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the point.
I mean, you want a typical and maybe the worst case, maybe 2 rooms that. Charlie, what would it take to do that? And how much time would it take to do that in all of our buildings?
Well, it's just a room by room process. You got quite a lot of square footage.
Yeah, about 1.7 million square feet.
Now, I can't really answer that right now. I'd have to think on that a little bit. But I mean, Carlos is in an exercise where somebody walks, you know, through each and every room, and
Well, I would start.
a thermometer for supply. And
Yep, I would start with looking at any existing plans that you have,
yeah,
and look at the equipment that's in there, and just look at the amount of see the amount of fresh air in the space, and just it'll be a very time-consuming process. It's not something that's easily done. Yeah. That's a lot of square footage.
Do you think we're talking about a week, a month, 2 months to do that? Just sort of rough order of magnitude.
I'd say probably a month.
I'd say maybe even longer than that.
Yep.
Is it something we could teach students, high school students, to do as a exercise in physics or something? I mean, is that the kind of, do you need a special expertise to do it, special machines, or just it's a calculation?
We use software to do it.
Yeah, it's something you're taught in school, and you have to be familiar with HVAC systems and have some experience with that. It's just not something that a typical person would be able to pick up on. I mean,
Okay.
Reading diagrams or blueprints are a whole different area.
No, I was just trying to get more help to you to do this sort of thing. There's more of that than anything else. Suzanne? And
yeah, hi, I have two questions or comments. One is, I think the school I'm most nervous about really is Pierce. So I don't know if, just because it doesn't, that Unit A doesn't have, windows as such to classrooms, and it's just an odd shaped building. So that would be the one I'm probably most concerned with. Other classrooms are pretty straightforward in terms of the classrooms with windows, but that area in Pierce is just something of its own. So that would be maybe the one to take the closer look at first, would be my thinking. Okay. And then my other question is would it be worthwhile for the MERVs to go from an 8 to a 10, for instance? Is that doable rather than going all the way to 13? And would that be cost effective to do that?
Again, I'd have to check every unit case by case and get airflows. If it can be done just by changing the filter out, yeah. I mean, yeah. It's not a huge increase in cost to the two different filters. It's when you get into modifying how the unit works that you start getting more and more expensive. So you got to balance, do you want to spend $10,000 to go up from a MERV 8 to a MERV 10? I mean, how easy is it to get done? And will it actually work? So I'd have to look at, again, all the equipment in the buildings with our HVAC people.
I think I'm going to try and move us along because I'm looking at our time. We will probably get back to a lot of these things. Barbara, I see your hand really wanting to talk, so go ahead. You have the last question on this particular part, I think.
Okay, my question is this. Have we considered using UV light strips like they have in health centers, either in classrooms or in the nurse's office?
Well, we looked at UV very early on. It didn't seem to be something that was going to be effective. We also, actually, I think Matt and I just talked the other day, potentially putting some equipment as a priority in the nurses area, whether it's ionization or UV. I'm waiting for, again, more feedback from the experts on what the best equipment is. I haven't heard anything more from the health department. I think Mike had some information on UV, though. He wants to share.
Yeah, thanks. I'd sent you and Carlos both a Boston Globe article on UVC, which is one variety of UV. I think it's worth taking a look at it and seeing whether it's worth following up.
Sure.
Yep, so we are planning on using UVC on new projects, and we're looking at two conditions. One is UVC that can be installed in ductwork, parallel with ductwork, and retrofit applications where we can put it after the cooling coil and air handling equipment. And we're also looking at it for new projects where we're just putting that amount of UV, we're allowing space for it just for that. So UVC is that's one of the good things about it. It's been around for a very long time. So it does, there are not just studies, it actually, we have confirmation from various sources that it does work at killing viruses. So that's something that we are looking at. The only issue here might be that it'd be probably you wouldn't be able to get in the amount of time that you need to reopen the school.
So Carlos, with that, is this something that could be done, sort of in a sequence? I'll call it, August, September, October, where we can sort of maximize the fresh air from outside and be working on that to modify the HVAC systems, just from a general timeline to work through multiple schools. And then a safety question about that. So the ultraviolet, light and emissions there, that's something that the students or staff wouldn't really be exposed to. It would be inside the ductwork, so it'd be very low risk to the occupants of the building.
Yeah, this would be at the air handling unit level is what we're recommending, where it can be done, or it can also be installed in the ductwork itself. So you have a length, depending on the duct size, you just run it over a long length of duct. And also from maintenance standpoint, you would shut this down because you do need to replace the emitters, annually. They do have a life.
Carlos, would that be on buildings that have centralized air systems versus buildings that have unit ventilators?
Yeah, so centralized buildings mostly. Terminal equipment, they do have UVCs that can be installed in terminal equipment, but we'd have to see if those unit ventilators could actually be retrofitted with a UVC emitter.
That's even though the unit ventilators are bringing in fresh air. So
they're bringing in.
Assuming there's something in the outside air that's a problem?
Yeah, so what happens with a unit ventilator, and I suspect, and Charlie, I'm sure they're top discharge, so they would actually be inside the unit, you wouldn't see them. So it would be a long tube that would go along right after the filtered section.
No, what I'm trying to understand is why you need it for the fresh air coming in.
Oh, it's not, it's actually after the discharge air, so it's not just fresh air, it's after the circulated air in the space as well. So the outside air mixes in with the circulated air for ventilation, and then it's discharged into the room. It's after that happens that the filter is at, and then after the filter would be the UV.
Okay, but we're not recirculating air in the room. We're bringing it in and then taking it out.
Yeah, the way the unit ventilator works is that it is recirculating air in the room itself to keep the temperature, to maintain temperature. So it's bringing in a certain amount of fresh air from the outside, and it's mixing with the room air, but all inside of this unit ventilator. You see these little louvers on the outside of the building, and that's the fresh air coming into the unit ventilator.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is.
So on that chart we saw though, where it says ability to turn off recirculated air, they were all marked yes, but in this case, it's actually not yes, because at least in the winter, we need to maintain heat, so.
We would have to have cool air coming in to prevent the building, prevent the space from overheating. And as Carlos said, once the room gets to temperature and you keep the air going, you can't keep pumping in heat. So the valve closes and you use recirculating air to sort of temper it a little bit. You could shut down, and Carlos can verify, you can shut down the fresh air or the return air on a unit ventilator, but I wouldn't be able to control the temperature that well once the room is satisfied. So to your point, I can do it, but we're going to lose control in building comfort. That's what you got to balance. It's the same thing with opening the windows. We can open the windows, but again, you're either going to be hot or cold. So we have to decide what's the priority. Perfect 100% air all the time, or comfort in the space. I would try to get a balance of it. Obviously, we want to try to get as much fresh air as you can, but I'm going to be the ones getting the complaint that my room is too hot and my room is too cold. Like 9,000 teachers and kids and 18,000 parents that are saying that this is not working. So, and Helen's smiling, but she knows it's true. We gotta come up with some system that can work and make everybody happy, but make it safe and healthy. And no building is exactly the same. No equipment is exactly the same. And we have buildings that range from 1910 up to, well, the devotion. So.
Well, I think the devotions we don't need to think about, actually, from everything you've said today.
But the designs are so different. Everything changes year by year, and everything gets a little bit more modern. And buildings are always getting healthier and healthier. So.
I think we've gone as far as we can go now. Ventilation, windows, unless there's some urgent question that what I would like to is maybe that we can meet again next week and have some answers on some of the questions that have come up, knowing which HEPA filters we're going to look at. Can we get them? When can we get them? Knowing the bathroom issues and any other, air circulation that we might be able, airflow that we might be able to do, at least on typical classrooms and the worst classroom in a school. If we could get some of that information for next week, I think it could really inform us as to, what is the distance to the goal line, basically. Yes, Dave.
I may have missed this earlier, but I'm just wondering, what's the budget parameters around the acquisition of these filters or some of these other items we're discussing? Do we have an exact figure?
So we heard anywhere from $150 to $400 per unit. We're talking over 100 units, probably erring on the side of 200. So we have more rather than less for those instances. I mean, I think we need one in the room that, the isolation room that we're going to be setting up for each class, for each school, in addition to the nurse's office, and then other areas where people might, where we might need it. Bathrooms, all the bathrooms, I think, could be an extra form of security rather than putting lids on all the toilets. Have these HEPA filters that can take out.
Are these costs already built into our budget? Or
nothing is built into our budget right now. So, we're maybe Jim can speak to that.
We do have a state grant for about $1.7 million that we're working on, finalizing costs for PPE as well as other COVID related costs. And this would obviously be one of those related costs. That's still in progress, and obviously getting kids and the staff back into the buildings is a priority, and being able to do it safely is there, just to Charlie's earlier comment about the magic bullet. If there happened to be one of those, even for one or some of the buildings where we could change the system in one fell swoop instead of plugging in a bunch of portables, that's something that we're I guess cautiously hopeful for while we're pursuing kind of both avenues in the short term.
Dave, and go ahead.
Just if there's anything that would be helpful to you and the committee, Helen, in particular, or to Jim or Matt or Charlie for advisory panel 4 to specifically respond to on Friday to facilitate prep for your meeting next week. Either now or offline, please just let me know and I'll make sure that we cover it.
Okay. Jim?
Yeah, I think I would say it now. The discussion is terrific. A high priority is the air exchange rate. And that sounded like the most difficult to get with the engineering calculations. The air exchange rate verifiable is going to be really important. And on the finances, the commissioner said today that he was feeling optimistic about federal money coming in, and stay tuned, that he was more optimistic than I heard him. But Matt, I'll keep you informed completely on that.
So just on the air exchange rate and round numbers, so people understand, we got about 1.7 million square feet of space. We got over 1,000 rooms. You know, there's not 1,000 different rooms. You know, many of them are really pretty close. We got a lot of classrooms in the 800 to 900 square foot range, but there's definitely some differences in buildings and differences between buildings that folks like Charlie and Carlos and maybe even some other folks, if to turn this around in short order, we might have to parse this into a few more people to get answers in the next week or two. I mean, I don't want to speak for Charlie or Carlos, but it is my understanding of it. It's not quick turnaround work. I'll defer to them.
Let me play devil's advocate, and we calculate this, and the numbers come out 2 or 3, because that's the way the systems are now. And to go higher than that, we have to have windows open all the time. I mean, once we have the data, what are we going to do with it? If you come up with a school that's an air exchange is 2, are you not going to put kids in that school?
I'm not saying we're not going to put, you want an answer to that? Is that a rhetorical?
No, I'm just throwing that out.
If it's a rhetorical question, then we can let it be a rhetorical question. But I would say that if the air exchange in the rate is inadequate, given the coronavirus, I will not put kids in that room. I want to know what the exchange rate is, and it needs to be safe to put kids in. And if it needs a boost through air purifying machines or whatever it takes, then maybe we can do that. I don't know about ionization. I don't know about ultraviolet lights. I don't know about all that. All I really am concerned about is the space safe, given the virus, to put students in? Is the exchange rate, is the ventilation adequate to do that? And maybe, David, the expert panel may be able to respond to that and give some guidance on that. But that's the way I feel about that.
And that exchange rate is 3.
I don't know. Is it 3?
Yeah. Well, I just want to know where's the goal to this, and if that's the goal. It's already been it's been vetted, and the health department's agreed to that as well.
That's what they've said.
If the health department says that the exchange rate, and the expert panel will weigh in, if the health department says the exchange rate is what it needs to be in terms of providing adequate ventilation to keep teachers and students safe, then I would accept what the health department and the expert panel says. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I think I'm move us on, although Carlos, is there any other words of advice that you might give us or thoughts that you have? I assume there are other school districts calling you the same as us.
Yes, we're actually doing the same type of work for the city of Cambridge. The only thing that I didn't see on your agenda is that would be there's just a cleaning protocol and disinfection protocol of the school. So the HVAC system is one thing with ventilation, but you have to make sure that the surfaces in the school itself are cleaned and then disinfected to meet the CDC guidelines. And so for the city of Cambridge, we've actually provided that information through an environmental company, not through us, but the cleaning and disinfecting should be part of this program.
Oh, of course. And I think that's something that you've been on top, correct?
Yeah. We had a meeting this morning again, going over the same questions and making sure people have equipment. We have equipment that's been arriving daily. We have disinfectants, and making sure that all the areas are taken care of daily or twice daily or whatever's needed depending on the particular area.
And isn't there some special machines that we purchased last year to also clean out the air or clean out disinfect the spaces? There was something, Matt, or?
Yeah, we purchased some electrostatic guns. We had a few before this started as a way to disinfect. As you know, pre-COVID, we used to call them outbreaks, and that would be when a handful of kids in one classroom got strep throat or some other type of germ, and the nurse called, you know, concerned and a little bit panicked. So we could disinfect the space, because typically we didn't disinfect all the touch points, you know, desks, railings, door handles every day. We would do bathrooms on a daily basis, but we wouldn't do all the touch points in a building. And, you know, we were ratcheting up to that back in February and March. And we have the ability to do that more so now. But the chemicals in the disinfectant are not something we want to use typically when the kids are in the building. It's always been done sort of after the kids have gone home, for the most part. We can use a neutral cleaner when kids are in the building, but we don't really want to be using a disinfectant on a regular basis. I think everybody understands the exception if there was an accident or somebody threw up, how we would clean that up and use it there, but we wouldn't be using it, and we would close that area. We wouldn't be using it all over the building with children in the building, because the EPA would, you know, there's protocols and cautions for using any type of disinfectant.
Okay. Carlos, if you have that protocol, is it possible to share it with us?
Yeah, well, this was specifically done for the city of Cambridge, so there is some copyright information here. But what I can do is, it's the study that we did with that company. They were very concerned about making sure that the surfaces are actually cleaned and dry before you disinfect.
Right, disinfecting on top of dirt just gives the germs a place to hide. So our custodians are well aware that a clean surface needs to be there first before you
Matt,
disinfect.
maybe I'll leave it up to you and Charlie to come back to us with some sort of protocols that you're thinking about for the cleaning.
Sure.
Susan, oh, go ahead.
In general, it's not going to, what we clean with and how we clean isn't really going to change that much. Frequency of cleaning during the school day will increase. Disinfecting will increase, but the products we use probably won't change all that much.
Okay, Susan, I'm going to let you have the last word because we need to move on, and I'm afraid, Mary, I'm hoping we're going to get to the extended day, at least to find out the issues. But go ahead, Susan, quickly.
Just very quickly, I just want to say thank you to everybody on this call. This is literally the hardest question in our country right now that no one has ever solved. So just thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to our building leaders, Hal and Jamie and Asa and all of our staff and Charlie, and just thank you. This is really, really hard. It's really important. People are scared. People don't know. And so just your expertise, your calm, your leadership is so important. So just giant thank you.
Okay, thank you. What?
I said you're welcome.
Thank you so much. And we will remember you, Charlie. I think now we're going to move on to quickly the furniture issue. Maybe we'll leave that for the next meeting, the furniture inventory.
Sure.
I think we'll do that because I'm concerned, and you know what you need to do for that. I think there's two other pieces here on the agenda. One has to do with outdoor classrooms. Hal, yeah.
Sorry, I just want to ask one question on ventilation while we still have Carlos here.
Okay.
So if we have 1,000 rooms and we go out to CVS and buy 4,000 box fans, what does that do for our numbers and calculations, at least until Charlie freaks out that we're spending too much money on heat because the windows are open and fans are blowing all over?
I don't know. I wouldn't do that at first. I think first I'd try to look at these typical rooms and see what you actually need to do before you do such a thing.
Actually,
But
oh, go ahead.
but I would just leave it at that. It's
If I'm not mistaken, the high school windows open from the top and the bottom.
Not so
Or
much.
they could.
Most of those, they could, but they
They
had a little bit of a guillotine effect. So most of those have been sealed from the top. It's screwed in at the top.
I'm wondering, Charlie, if there's a way of fixing that so that we get that effect that Carlos was talking about, the air coming in and going out.
We can look into it.
That would be an important thing, right, Carlos?
yeah, that's how the system was designed, more than likely, so that you had the operable windows low and high.
Okay. Does that help, Hal?
Sure.
Okay. So let's go to the outdoor spaces. I think at this point, Carlos, we appreciate you being here with us and helping us. And we may call on you. I'm sure we'll call on you again. But if you have to do other things, that's okay too. You're welcome to stay though.
I appreciate that. No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. What I'd like to talk about is the outdoor classrooms and tents and ability to get tents for those spaces that don't work indoors or just as another space for kids to be in, etc. How are we doing with that?
So we've started that conversation with both the procurement department and the DPW, because not all of the space where we would necessarily put a tent to have a classroom is on school property. And some logistics about getting some vendors out to look at the space, assess it, what can they provide us, and then can it be more than seasonal, i.e. can we add heat to the space? What does that look like? What would that cost? And what would that sound like? Because it is if it's going to be used as a classroom and or a staging area, I'll note for extended day, as we probably segue into that briefly. That matters as to how functional it's going to be. I mean, to me, it's 4 months a year, September, October, and maybe part of April, May, June. We can take full advantage of the outside air during the school day. It's the other middle of the year that the cold might make it more of a challenge for us.
Okay, so you're looking at procuring tents and
right, and that would be to supplement what the principals are trying to do to schedule classrooms in their buildings, and where we would put them, in close proximity to the school. But if they don't need them because they can use their other spaces, and by other spaces, those special spaces, the gym, the CAF, the library, a multi-purpose room, music rooms, things of that nature, that they wind up splitting or putting classrooms in there, and running that, and they actually don't need a tent, then we wouldn't necessarily look at adding it just for the sake of having an extra space. So again, it's trying to go down more than one path at the same time, so we can choose the best path, literally in less than 2 weeks.
well, it would seem to me every school has a basketball court that could be used, because I think basketball is not allowed to be played anyways right now, as a space. And one of the things that I've heard or thought about has to do with the teacher's room and having a bigger open space for teachers to be able to be, during their breaks or whenever, they might, not have to be in their classroom, to be able to be outside. Asa?
So I was thinking about tents for the school, and I don't think Heath has a specific need, but I do think other schools may find that to be an appealing offer. One of the things that the tent does do is eat up a lot of the space, like the basketball court, which I know at Heath, depending on how many classes we have and how frequently we have to split the classes into smaller pods. and how limited the school day hours are, we have to think about like a recess break, and we're splitting all the spaces up to accommodate enough spaces for those smaller pods to have recess and for everybody to get that in the day. So I think tents provide that necessary space, but I'm wondering also, it eats up space as well. And then thinking about what are the recreation, are we in cahoots with Parks and Rec so that we can use, like we could use the rec center across the street in Elliott Field. So thinking about the tangential spaces so that if we need tents, we're able to then flow into close by spaces. I've been in also a lot of the teachers' lounges, and they are really small. I know at Heath it's been carved up over and over and over again, so we would have to rethink how we're gathering for sure. But that's just one school, so.
Well, there is the courtyard space that could be used as an open space if it had a top. I mean, each school and each principal, I think, will need to think about what works for their school. I mean, because we don't have cookie cutter schools, we have this need for each school to look at it, which is a good thing. I mean,
right, and every principal's doing that. And could we use the space for multi-uses so that we have an indoor, craft area during recess in a tent, or it's a shared space with after school, extended day, whatever it is.
Right.
So we are really creative thinking.
Right, right. Andy?
Yeah, I guess I'm feeling a little confused now because I'm having trouble reconciling what we're hearing from ASA with what we heard at the school committee meeting this week, where it sounded like because of limitations of space under social distancing conditions, we might have to only bring back, BEEP and K through 2 and high need students, right? But so now I'm hearing that, well, even if we had more outdoor space at Heath, like under a tent, like that wouldn't actually change anything essential. Whereas if we're keeping whole grade levels out of school because we don't have space for them, how can it not be the case that adding, hundreds of square feet of outdoor space wouldn't help that situation?
Or depending on which model we employ. So if we were to be having middle schoolers on a smaller schedule or something like that, we just have to be, I'm just wondering about how flexible we are with all of our spaces, right? Depending on what model we're employing and when. That's my only thinking.
Helen, you're muted.
Helen, you're muted.
Sorry. I mean, if we were to go, what I was saying is if we were to go all in and get everybody back who wants to come back, we know there's 19% of families that have said, no, under no condition am I sending my kids back. Well, that starts to make our classes much smaller. And there'll be people who won't be coming into Brookline as we've had in years past. So all of that leads to one question that I mean, if we were to have everybody in, would we, what would I think the principals need to think about how much space one would need for that. I think we also need to have from Dr. Marini, if you're willing to take this job on, what our population will be like in the fall. Can we get a better handle on the numbers? Because I think that will be a critical piece in figuring out the airflow, the number of people that can be in a space, etc.
Yeah. So I think trying to get a handle on the numbers is exactly the right way to go. But really, to Andy's point, how come we said we can't get everyone in? So we're going to go, we're leaning toward remote. And now we're talking about everyone coming in. I think that's a great question. And really the answer to that question is the outdoor space and outdoor learning space has become more viable in terms of being able to it's the 6 foot distance that is important. I'm looking at the 6 foot space because if you put students in and you plan it off for 3 feet, unless you nail those little guys in place, they're going to be moving around. That 3 feet's not going to be 3 feet, but 6 feet, that gives you flexibility. If we can have the tents, I've become more and more enamored to this tent deal, that if we can have tents, then that gives us a lot more flexibility in order for scheduling classes, for using space in a more creative way, for the extended day as well, for the breakout space, for even physical education space or art space, you name it. It gives us a lot more flexibility, and it's outside. So that adds to it as well. We're not there. Don't make any mistake about that. We are not there. However, I have a hunch that we're going to be going back and looking at the all-in, not just at the 3 and the 6. And when we did the pressure test on that, it wasn't going to work. Well, now if the pressure is released a little bit through tents, no pressure, Matt, I know that you're doing 100,000 things at once, but if the pressure is released, so to speak, with outdoor learning, that is protected outdoor learning, not just outside, because that's not reliable. If it rains, you get a storm, where are the kids going to go? That's not reliable. I'm not comfortable with that. But if we have tents where it's reliable as outside space, it opens up in a whole different way. So now we have to accelerate our planning. Asa, I know you're coming on Friday, buddy. Get some sleep because it's going to be a long day. And we are going to do the pressure test again to see what happens in that scenario. So that was a good question, Andy. And Helen, if we can get the numbers as closely as possible, I don't know how well the principals will be able to respond to that right now, particularly if there are people who are moving out of town, or people who are not going to be, they're going to be homeschooled or whatever it's going to be. What's the impact on the schools could be significant, but I don't know that any principal has a good handle on that yet. So, but we'll talk about maybe a system of being able to find those numbers to the extent that we can.
I think that would be great. And I think that, knowing, the withdrawals, the numbers of registrations, and knowing the 19% that we got in a sample of 70% of the families, that's a pretty good sample. And that lowers our numbers right there. So I'll leave that up to you, Jim. I'm going to move on from the tents and the evaluation. The PPE.
Can we not move on from tents yet? Is that okay?
Okay. I'm trying to be respectful of, we did have extended day on the, but
I just want to make one comment.
I think this is their issue too, so let's go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critical to the success of extended day is to be able to have some of this expanded space, and especially dedicated space. When we did the walkthrough last week at Baker, there was a specific comment about not sharing space over the course of the school day. Everyone has dedicated space, and so to me it seems critical. But I just want to make one comment. I mean, I've made lots of comments about outdoor space and excitement about this, and my serious enthusiasm for us really pursuing this. I just wanted to make 2 comments about it. One is that tent space is great. I don't think we actually need tent space. And if you look at the article that Suzanne emailed Jim and I think Helen, you got it earlier too, it was about what Vermont is doing, and they are doing partnerships with the community where, for example, on a rainy day, a class or 2 might go to a church nearby, which would then allow them to have an indoor space that you would have, like, again, the pods, the small classes that would then go to that. So thinking about, this is going to be such a community partnership between Matt talking to Parks and Rec, Matt talking to transportation. And I think also we need to look at our community partners of particularly churches. I can't think of other, perhaps the Coolidge Corner Theater, just for an additional large, like places which have large rooms, which we could co-opt on rainy days. And that's our plan, is if it's rainy, you don't necessarily go to your school, you go to the lobby of something, or the something like that. Some of these other spaces that we might think about asking for partnerships.
Barbara?
I brought this up the other day about tents, and Matt said at that point he was only looking at tents that had tops and no sides. I think we need to be more explicit about it, because people are talking about tents, and I don't know about you, but when I think of a tent, I think of a fairly enclosed space that has no ventilation. So I think we need to be very clear. It's not tents we're talking about. We are talking about covered spaces that can be used outdoors. Because how would you ventilate a tent?
You can open them and close them, and you can, roll up the sides or put them down. You could have one side open and one side down.
Yes, you can. And who is going to do that? Do you think the teachers are going to get out there and say, oh, it's hot in here, I want to raise this up, or there's no ventilation? I think there's more to the planning of tents than
I guess
people are thinking about.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think the whole outdoor piece has to be very creative. There are schools that do totally outdoors. I was just looking at one in California, albeit there the temperature is much better. But that's the whole thing about that school is the outdoors. But I think we need to know at least what the possibilities are, and have hopefully the teachers and the principals think together creatively what will work, not just to go spend money on tents, but what will work. Where could you see it happening?
Right. Just
Michelle?
Barbara, to your point, we are going to try to find out how functional it can be for ventilation, heating, year-round use, not year-round use. There are a lot of questions that we need answered. But having the additional space, there seems to be more than enough interest to pursue what it's going to cost and how practical it's going to be to set up.
I wanted to let Michelle, I don't know if you have anything that you might want to say about some of this, or you're just taking it all in.
I'm taking it all in right now. I mean, health and safety is a really, really big concern among the staff right now. I can tell you that for sure. So thinking about tents is actually not something we're even getting any information on right now, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for being here. Asa, you had something, and then Andy.
I was going to add, I heard Matt listing all the things that needed to be considered for any kind of tent use. And if we are planning on doing tent use, I would also need to have, for like educational settings, internet access, stuff like that, extension cords, so that we could have tech out there. We've flipped our curriculum so much, even outside of these pandemic school closure times, that having actualized tech capability campus-wide would be absolutely necessary and doable, but necessary.
And we do have wireless in all the buildings. The question is, what will it take to get the wireless to go further out? Andy. Sorry,
I think Suzanne has had her hand up. Suzanne has had her hand up, so I'll cede my time to her for the moment.
Okay.
Thank you, Andy.
I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Suzanne.
That's okay. I just want to kind of reiterate what Mariah has said. Really, so we're talking about two different things. One is tents, which are spaces, and are they substitutes for classrooms or other spaces, common spaces we need? And then the other conversation that's related to it, but somewhat different, is just using the outside as a learning environment. And so some of what I sent to Mariah and Jim were about schools in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, where the kids go outside like they do Forest Fridays in kindergarten. And so there's some really exciting opportunities to think about not being stuck in the building, but do learning outside of the building. And so that's a part of the tent conversation, but it's also part of a curriculum conversation, but they could really work together well.
Okay. Andy, did you?
Yeah, so Matt mentioned that he's in discussions right now with like procurement and DPW. I'm wondering, would it strengthen your position in these discussions if this subcommittee were somehow to like have a motion expressing its sense that this is something we really, really want to look into, and it could actually affect how many kids are able to be back in school in the fall?
It certainly wouldn't hurt, but working with Dave Giannakakis in procurement and Aaron Galantine in DPW, we seem to have a pretty good working relationship, and they understand what it is we're trying to figure out. I think most people understand we're trying to figure out a way to reopen school and stay open in a way that manages as much of the risk as possible. I'm being very cautious not to say safe, because that brings up more of a feeling than anything else. But I think they fully understand what we're trying to accomplish. Erin's also a parent of children in our system, so she looks at it from both sides pretty quickly and easily.
So I think that they will help us. I don't think we need to do any kind of motion at this point. But what I do want to do before everybody leaves, there's two pieces. One, I want to set up a meeting, I think for next week from, I don't know if Wednesday is a good day for the subcommittee. I think Wednesday is better than Tuesday because Tuesday there's a school committee meeting. Maybe from, does this time work for people? If you could give a thumbs up if it does.
For next Wednesday, you said?
Yes. 2. No, Jim, you can't. We can do it later if that works better, 4 to 6.
I have a 3 to 4:30, but it's a hold. Oh, wait a minute. No, I have a hold. That's I'm planning a community meeting for Brookline educators to go on a Zoom with. And that hasn't been confirmed. I'm trying to get the others to go with me. So.
Well, so maybe earlier. Does that work? 1 to 3? Would that work better?
On Wednesday, right?
Yeah.
I could make 1 to 3 work because I'm meeting with Casey around this kind of issue. So I think Casey will be flexible with her time, so I can make that work.
Okay. She can join us, certainly. Hal, is that feasible for you? Good. Okay, it looks like from what I could see, the majority could make it. Let's do that. I think, Mary, I don't know what your time is like. I'm willing to stay for another 5-10 minutes if you think we should do this now, that you could at least lay out some of the issues that Extended Day has, or we could take that up first thing the next meeting.
I mean, I think we're willing to do either, whatever is in the best interest of, of all of your times. I have Ellen Lennox from Pierce School on this call as well. But I think if, we have a list of questions that have come up as the directors of the meeting along with Matt as well. But I think if we can't get our questions answered and we could email them, that would be wonderful.
Actually, Mary, I'm sorry. I'm looking at my head was 4 o'clock ending, but we're really ending at 4:30. So we're good.
Okay.
We're good. We're actually okay with time.
Perfect. Okay, then great. So first of all, we just want to really thank each and every one of you for allowing us, even a few minutes to come on and just get some questions answered, or just really to get some direction of if Extended Day has been thought of at all. We understand the difficulty of all of this and planning for the school day. But along with that, we service so many of the families of Brookline. My program, speaking for myself at Lawrence, I have 140 kids in the program and 16 staff who are looking for, to me for answers. And although they understand we don't even have the school day, set into place yet, they really are just looking to see if Extended Day will even, be running in the schools, if we'll be permitted to be there. If we'll be able to share space, as all of you know, many of our schools don't have designated space. So Extended Day is going into classrooms every afternoon, and with COVID here and with the new rules and regulations that are going to have to go through with cleaning and things like that, we just wanted to to see where everybody's thoughts were regarding Extended Day.
So I have a question. You're under DEEC's rules, right?
We also are following EEC rules. So,
yeah, so you can only have 10 kids with an adult.
Yes.
Space.
Yep.
So that means you need 14 spaces at least.
I mean, each school is going to be different because the numbers are going to be different. But yeah, so we would certainly be looking, to be enlarging space for this year for our programs.
And if I can just jump in here, this is Ellen from the Pierce Extended Day Program Director. I also just want to say, I think we were really caught off guard by the noon dismissal, because that is not the way our programs have been designed in the past. That's not something that we had even thought about. We were planning, you know, we are looking at the hybrid model, but we weren't planning for a noon dismissal and how that really is changing everything about the way we're thinking about our programming right now. But we'd like to have some answers for our families if we can. I'm sorry.
That hasn't been decided yet by the school committee. It was something that, you know, the administration put forward, but we haven't really determined that at all.
Yeah, and we haven't settled on that either, Ellen. You know, it was quite frankly, you put that in there as a placeholder, but we were not settled in that. What we were trying to say by putting it in at that point was that if we were not going to be able to serve lunch for a variety of reasons, then we would want the school to end a little earlier. But noon is not, it's way too early.
Okay.
We just haven't, that piece is still in flux.
Right, and I mean, and we understand that as well, but we were kind of thinking if it was a noon dismissal and kids were going to be going home for possibly, we've heard maybe doing their, you know, their gym or their music at home online, like, you know, would they be able to stay for extended day, or would they be coming back for extended day? There's just quite a lot of questions regarding our place right now. So I guess first thing you know, minus all of the questions that we had, I guess, you know, do you see extended day for, you know, pre-K through 6th grade being in the schools and sharing classroom space? I guess is our first question.
I think, Matt, you've been thinking about this a bit. Maybe you can, yes, I mean, extended day is important. Let's start with that assumption. Yeah. And then.
So I think I was asked for my opinion. So my answer would be yes. If it's safe for the kids to be in school during the school day, and then the cohort may not be exactly the same, because we're not, just imagine a 1st grade class. That classroom isn't all, we'll call it 16 or 18 kids, isn't all going to necessarily go down to extended day. The kids are going to have to go somewhere for a transition. We're going to have to clean and disinfect the space the same way we would at the end of the day. Normally, now we'd have to do it for the kids to be able to transition in there afterwards. But I think, you know, families where the parents need to be at work and the kids need to be at school and they're young enough, they still need to have some aftercare. And for families to try to scramble to figure that out on short term, I think we have to do what we can to figure out to avoid putting them in that situation if and where we can help it.
That's great. Okay, thank you. I think we also kind of know the answer, but we figured we would just ask anyway. If we're in the hybrid model and cohort A is coming on 2 days a week and cohort B the other 2 days, could the kids come to extended day on the non-cohort days? So coming 4 days a week to extended day? Would that be a possibility, or so that our enrollment can, you know, stay up and help as many families as we can on a daily basis, and to keep our staff?
So let me respond to that question this way. One of the purposes of bringing the plan to the school committee when we did in its unfinished form, as you saw, is for exactly this reason, is to get the reaction. What didn't we consider that we need to consider? And hearing from you is very, very important. I hope that information is formally coming to us somehow, that you're talking with either Casey or Erin or myself or your principal or somebody to get that information to us for us to consider. And this is a good forum to do that in as well, so that we need to hear. We've certainly heard a lot from the school committee, and we're going back to the school committee August 4th with responses to the questions that they raised at the table, and then giving them time now to consider and talk with people and hear from you, and also in their own minds trying to figure out how this is going to work. And when we come back next week or whenever that is, to have another round of it where we shine it up and sharpen it up a little bit more, and making certain that A, we're being responsive to the community, B, we're being responsive to the students to the extent possible, and that we haven't missed anything, so that we can build a program that will work. So hearing from you is exactly what we should be doing at this time. And by the way, when the final product comes out, we know that we can't meet everybody's needs, but we have to hear so that we can meet the needs. And, and that's what we're going to try to do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Another question that we had was, we understand that schools are going to have their separate COVID spaces for kids that were sick during the school day. Do you think that's an area that extended days will be able to use as well, or will we need to, make our own COVID space in whatever part of the school that we are in?
Well, that space is going to be designated just for students and possibly staff that demonstrate symptoms, so they can, have a space to rest and isolate from the rest of the folks in the building until they get picked up to leave from school. So, it's going to be disinfected each time after someone was in there. So,
Even after hours, we would possibly be able to.
I don't see why you wouldn't
Okay.
really be able to have access to the space if need be. But we could discuss that in greater detail. I want to make sure the nurses and the Board of Health are all on the same page.
Okay.
But the space is not intended to be used for anything else other than a COVID resting area.
Okay. Okay, great. Another thing that we had talked about is, we understand going into classrooms right at the end of the school day, may not be an option, because they may need to, Matt and his team may need to be disinfecting and things like that. So extended day is going to be needing to find, a new home for maybe 15, 20 minutes of the day. So we were actually wondering if there would be any way that the public playground could be, because as we all know, at 2:30, those playgrounds are filled with parents, nannies, and all carriages in the world. But would there be a section or things that we could make for possibly just extended day, so that we can have a home base until we can get into the spaces after the cleaning has happened? Like a designated areas of outside.
I think, in each school, it will be a little bit different. I think this is an issue that should be discussed with each principal. I think, trying to be good neighbors back and forth and helping each other out is what we're looking to do. And, it's probably going to take some logistics for pickup even, because people used to go into the building sometimes to pick up. People, would be waiting in groups outside. That's not going to happen either. So I think all those things need to be thought through together with each principal and each program. Would be my sense. I don't know if anybody else has. Yes, Asa.
Well, I just think on the whole, we're going to have to rethink what dismissal looks like, right? Typically it's 2:30, no bell goes off, kids just, goodbye, have a nice day. And then they walk till they find their ride or their nanny or their parents. And so we're going to have to rethink all of what dismissal looks like. And so that will be a part of our planning when we get down to brass tacks, if we have kids in the building.
Okay, thank you. Al, do you want to jump on?
Here. So I guess I'm not sure if this is the right committee to ask the question, because the other questions we had really were relating to rent and the costs that we are going to incur, since many of the programs have taken a huge loss, obviously, with the closing of our programs in the fall. 6 of us were able to remain open and do remote learning with the kids. 2 of the programs had to furlough their staff. So one of the questions that we were asking about is it possible for us to get a credit? We had paid our rent for April, May, and June. That's already been paid. For this, going into this year, for the spaces that we use. And we also were really hoping that maybe we could not be charged additional rent, because we are going to need twice as much space based on the EEC regulations. So we're hoping that we might be given some consideration for this 1 year, and just making some decisions about the rent that we pay based on all of these factors that we're faced with right now.
Yeah, I think this is the right group. I don't think this is something that we can discuss right now, but I think it's something we need to think about. I hear what you're saying, and I understand that these are issues, in terms of keeping yourselves afloat. The other piece, though, is if there is added cleaning that has to happen, who bears the brunt of that, because we're changing rooms with, reusing rooms. But all those things, I think we can talk about and work out. I don't want to answer that right now, but I think it's something that we will need to think about. We've also been asked by the Brookline Adult and Community Education for a similar sort of, what's the word, consideration. So,
Robin, could I share my screen for a minute while people continue to talk on the topic?
and Robin, could you let Sharon Corliss in? She's also the Baker Extended Day. She's the only one I know who's here that's on there as a panelist. Okay, Ellen, would you like to, are there other issues that you guys have thought
well,
about?
I just wanted to add, and I think that Matt is aware of this, that EEC regulations, there's certainly serious cleaning protocols that we have, and that our staff are capable and will be trained to go in and clean the space beforehand. The only additional cleaning would be at the end of the day, which has already been happening for us. We weren't paying additional costs for that. The custodians were coming at 6 o'clock when we were through to clean our spaces. So just to bear that in mind, I think, when you're thinking about the fees. So
that's very helpful. And Matt, you're showing.
So this is just a summary of the extended day program. I asked them for some information but before we met with you guys, because we've had some discussions. So I mean, I can share this as well with the group.
Bigger, Matt, too?
Yep.
No, thank you.
So this is the enrollments were as of
last year.
Last year, okay.
Yep.
In April.
Okay.
Oh, so Driscoll cuts off a little bit. I'll find the right size. It's probably 140 or 133.
Okay. All right. So
is that better?
This is helpful to have this information as background information for us. But I mean, I think well, first let me see. Are there any questions from the committee? Let's start with that. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions here? I guess then yeah, Suzanne.
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm absolutely committed to making PSED work, not PSED, that was Pierce, of course, but the extended day programs to work. You know, Ellen, we were there for many years, and it's just so critical. And in fact, you know, I would hope that we might sit down at some point on which committee or which group to do this with, but it may be, in fact, that extended day offers more services as families need them, especially if we go into hybrid. So just to be open about that and to be willing to talk and start thinking outside the box a little bit on how we serve our families the best we can.
So I think what we need to do is think about this, have this at, I guess, our next meeting, because you guys need to know pretty soon whether or not what's happening. There has to be a conversation with each one of you and your principals to think through some of the issues, maybe to bring some of those back here to see if we can all creatively brainstorm on how to resolve them.
I do know many of us have been keeping dialogue with our principals throughout the summer, but I feel like until the school day model is put out, really we're at a standstill. We do meet once a week and, you know, come up with all scenarios, but until we really know what the day is going to look like or how many days the kids are going to be in, we really can't, you know, even survey our families yet.
Sure.
To find out what their needs are, because I feel like that can happen on August, you know, 8th, 9th, or 10th when the school day comes out. Then I think we can get a jump on what our extended days will look like. But many of us have the support of our principals, but you know, adding quite a lot of rooms is going to be a big factor for the teachers, which is very understandable. So I do think we're going to have a little bit of struggle and on those accounts.
Helen, this is Sharon Abramowitz. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. So this question is possibly either for Matt or for Mary Ellen, but I'm wondering if we know to what extent, if at all, costs associated with extended day programs, including cleaning costs, but also possibly expanded services, are covered in FEMA, MEMA, and other statewide funding support mechanisms for COVID reimbursement.
I think some of the cleaning might be as an extension of the school day, but I'd have to check the grant application for what's in and what's out. I hadn't thought of that one in particular. Obviously, the materials for cleaning are obviously one of the things that's covered as a supply. I can get back to you and get an answer on that.
And if Mary Ellen is still here, what about the services side?
So it's essentially the PPE, and there are services, cleaning services that are not budgeted for. They're not part of our base budget. So for example, like the overtime would be something that we could charge to FEMA, MEMA, and the various funding sources. The PPE, the masks, and the whatnot that Matt just ordered is all being charged against the 1.7 million. Some of the other, so it's essentially what's not been budgeted for is kind of the first pass, and then the really test. So we're collecting more information. The 1.7 million is going to go pretty quickly. If we have, so for example, Matt, I am looking at that 1.7 million to fund the balance of our custodians, because we are not going to have the rental facilities revenue this year, and we charge off three custodians to that account. And so in order to bring those people back, we need to have an identified funding source. So those 3 people will be in that, will be submitted in that. One of the concerns I have about all of the funding sources at this point, Sharon, that you should know that we're trying to get a definition on is there's a phrase that says all the funds have to be obligated by 12/30/20. I need the definition of what they mean by obligated. Is it an encumbrance? Is it a contract? Well, payroll will be for the entire year. And so do I need to do a payroll encumbrance somehow? How do I show that that's actually obligated, and what do they mean? Or does obligated mean that it's actually spent and out the door? So hopefully that answer we'll have in the next 2 weeks. And then, but we have to, and we'll have it before we get the grant application submitted. Does that answer your question, or did we miss a piece?
It does in part. I appreciate sort of the information about the expansion of services that are required for capital maintenance, which is certainly germane to the committee, but I think that some of the questions that are being asked are a little bit more broad in scope, and it may actually have to do with new funding that is coming down the line, or that's expected to come, sometime in the next few months, if that's going to materialize. And Helen, I'm actually going to pitch this back to you in your other capacity as chair of the, as chair of the, I guess, government affairs subcommittee, right. Which is, do we have any anticipation that the expansion in funding, or so the provision of like COVID dedicated funding might include funding to support extended day services, in order to accommodate, issues that are specific to extended day programming, like the need for increased staff or anything like that?
Well, so I actually saw on some email from an EEC, I don't think it was from them directly, I think it was from a lobbyist group, talking about legislation out there for extended, well, it's for early childhood and out of school time for the legislature to come up with more money for these groups. I think you're probably aware of that, Sharon. I see you shaking your head. Yes. So I think there are different streams, and sometimes it's hard for the two streams to work together very well, but sometimes we just need to also go to bat for the other stream to make sure that everybody gets what they need.
One last question for Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen, currently we don't have an out of school time policy that would enable us to, I don't know, sort of recognize this particular, I mean, we certainly have many mechanisms for recognizing the status of extended day as being essential to our educational programming, but we don't actually have an out of school time policy. I don't know, if funding like that is potentially going to be released, if it wouldn't be worthwhile to expedite that in order to facilitate our ability to transfer resources, space, et cetera, under, COVID conditions. I do know that in the recent guidance from, MASC, they recommended that we sort of think about this at a policy level as well as like many other issues. There was a really long list. But, noting that David was on the call, I don't know if he's still here. Should we be thinking about prioritizing this in order to kind of remove any policy barriers that are often frequently cited in order to make sure that, this transition can happen and that we don't actually disable by accident, a really, really essential part of our, school-based programming?
So I think the very important thing for everybody to remember is that the extended days are independent of the town and the school department. So we can't just transfer resources. We have to be mindful, careful about how we use our resources, and 100%, we need to figure that out so that extended day can function and support families in Brookline. But it's not, I think statute is going to get in the way before policy. So I think we need to be mindful of what that partnership needs to look like. Whether there's gap times, for example, before extended day starts and the school closes, that potentially there could be a gap of time I think there are lots of conversations around that need to happen.
And Sharon, I'm sorry, Mary Ellen.
Go ahead, I'm done.
I think one of the things that we have done over the years, not just for COVID, is, extended day is like a preferred nation, so to speak. We have our closest friends, extended days and steps and a few other groups, and we are able to do things especially in that way. And the reduced rent is one of them, but I think we need to work on the things that we can do that are feasible, not and support any other monies that you might be able to get from other sources. But Sharon, I know you came in a little bit late. I'm sorry I couldn't get you over sooner. Is there anything else that you want to add?
No, I think you hit most of our questions. I think Mary and Ellen have actually the list of them, but yeah, we're just,
okay.
Yeah, you've hit most of our questions.
If you want to send that to us in a written form, that would probably be helpful. I got down most of it, but just to make sure we have everything.
Absolutely, I can
you
certainly
could send
do
it to Robin and she'll get it out to us.
Mhm.
And I think we're at the witching hour. It's 4:34, but go ahead, David, I'll let you have the.
I see on the chart we have the 8 elementary schools listed. Is there a plan for extended day at the BEEP centers? And if so, could that data maybe be added?
So the extended days at BEEP are part of the school system right now. They're not separate. So whatever we do in the schools, I mean, that will be part of that. And I know that so it's separate is what I'm saying.
We have similar information though to what was presented
about
for the BEEP extended day?
We can get that, yes, but I didn't gather it because they're our employees, not our partners, and that's kind of the key word is that we treat them as partners, not as other short-term rental groups who we schedule, because it's all about scheduling the building after hours, after the school day is done.
Mariah, I guess I'll let you have the last word.
I just wanted to say that we got an email from a parent today or last night noting that there are private programs that are, if schools are going to hybrid, are going to be filling in the gaps for families. And so I just think we need to be super cognizant that there will be parents who need coverage. And so, and we expose ourselves to additional risk if our families need to go outside of the school. They are then being exposed to other communities and then bringing that back to our school. So whatever we can do, and we need to do everything we can to make sure that we can be providing that coverage for families within our community to reduce our overall exposure.
Yes, agreed. Thank you. Those are good words. I think we have actually reached the end of our time. We have a lot of work this next week. I think we gave Jim and Matt and Hal and Asa a lot of work and things to think about. And we'll meet again next week. We said from 1 to 3, correct? On Wednesday. Hopefully we'll have good answers and be able to think towards what is feasible for the Brookline Public Schools. I don't know what that is.
Helen, excuse me, I want to just say thank you very much for taking the time to talk about extended day. We've been trying to get information and answers, and it's been difficult with the focus being on school reopening, which we totally get, but it's been a little bit difficult for us. So we really appreciate everybody's time and thoughtfulness on this issue for us. Would you like us to be part of this conversation next week, or do you think we should be looking at meeting with other people? Just inquiring.
I think you're welcome to come to the meeting. Let me put together what information we'll have, and so that I'll be able to put together an agenda together with Matt and Superintendent Marini, and we can let you know. But either way, I think it's important for you to hear what's going on in the schools, because what we're going to be talking about are the things that you need to know too. Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. And I apologize for thinking that I didn't have time for you, because we did have the time.
No, that worked out great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. Have a good week. Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Thank you.